So let's move on to the introduction. Some definitions need to be discussed as a prerequisite. Words are important, words have meanings, and we need to be clear about our meanings, otherwise we'll all get confused. So for our purposes, the universe consists of all mass, all energy, all spatial dimensions and time. And by spatial dimensions we mean length, width, and height. Science is a study of what exists in the universe through measurement and hypothesis testing. Related to that is a scientific model is a simplification of reality that is described using math and other types of relationships. An important definition here is for the word nothing, because the word nothing can actually mean something if we're not careful. And that's a problem with some scientists who talk about arguments like the Kalam. They use the word nothing when they actually mean something. Let's explain what we mean. Let's unpack that. So by nothing we mean no thing. Nothing has no existence. Nothing is not even a potential, in that it doesn't even have the potential to interact with anything, because nothing doesn't exist. Okay, so why am I being so particular about this? Well, I'm being particular about this because some scientists think that the empty vacuum in space is nothing, because they equate the vacuum with nothing. But that isn't true, because the vacuum has dimensions. It has length, width, and height. So the vacuum is something. You may call it a placeholder for stuff you can put matter into. But also, the empty vacuum in space has what's called an energy density. And when we talk about density, what we mean is there's a distribution of stuff. And so in the vacuum you have this energy density, so that if you were able to separate a vacuum of, let's say, 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, that cube, which is a vacuum, would actually have energy. And if you remember Einstein's equations, E equals mc squared, well, there is some probability that the energy in that vacuum can give rise to virtual particles, because energy and mass are in some ways related. E equals mc squared. That's a relationship. And so if a scientist says an empty vacuum is nothing, he's wrong, because the empty vacuum has energy, and energy is something. So nothing is no thing. Nothing is not an empty vacuum. Okay, I've beaten that enough. So let's talk about some possible explanations for the universe. Well, just as a highlight, well, the first thing is maybe the universe created itself. Well, this is a logical contradiction, because for the universe to create itself, it must already exist. But if it already existed, how can it create itself? That's a logical contradiction. Well, what if the universe always existed? Well, that's a possibility, but we'll find out that science and philosophy says it had a beginning. Well, there's a third option. The universe came from nothing by nothing. It just popped into existence. There was nothing. Well, it's hard to say there was nothing. There was no being, and suddenly there was everything. And I think William Lane Craig is right in pointing out that this is worse than magic, because what you're saying is there was an abracadabra. Well, actually, in magic there is an abracadabra with a magician, and then stuff happens. Well, in this case, stuff just happened without the abracadabra of the magician. So 3 seems very weak, and I think it also violates a metaphysical axiom, which is like a principle of logic. So I think 3 doesn't work. So the fourth option is the universe was created by something outside of it. So the universe didn't always exist, and then it came into existence, but it has a cause. And that cause, of course, is outside the universe. And that external cause grounds the universe's existence. And that's what we're going to focus on, really, is 4. This argument had its beginnings with John Philoponus around 580 AD, who initiated some arguments for creation from nothing. He based this on the impossibility of an infinite temporal regress of events, and what that means is you can't have an infinite number of past seconds, basically. This was picked up by Muslim and Jewish theologians and developed further. The current Kalam proponents are William Lane Craig. His PhD dissertation was published in 1979, the Kalam Cosmological Argument. He has been the lead defender of the argument for the last 30 years, and he's incorporated advanced scientific cosmology into the argument. Jim Sinclair is a recent proponent of the argument. He focuses on what we'll call speculative cosmology suggestions. To be honest with you, people don't like some of the implications of what we call the Big Bang, and so they try and escape from the Big Bang. And the Big Bang is a description of cosmology, or cosmology incorporates the Big Bang. And so Jim Sinclair reviews the new theories and critiques them in the context of the Kalam. J.P. Moreland, this is a book that he wrote, Scaling the Secular City. It came out, it had its sixth printing in 1991. A superb book. It's where I was first introduced to this this argument, which is way back in 1992. I highly recommend this book. Maybe a little dated, but still very, very strong. Paul Copan recently wrote a book with William Lane Craig, Creation Out of Nothing. Now, the Kalam is a very strong argument because it has only 3 steps. So it's a series of 3 connected statements. And each statement has multiple supporting factors. You have math and logic, which support some of the aspects, but you also have what I'll call historical science. And this is where we have to be very specific, because what we're talking about is an event in the past. So that's why we call it historical science. It's looking at stuff in the past, which is different than going into the lab and doing science today. The Kalam is strong, and this is something that isn't explored a lot by people who discuss the Kalam, but I want to, because I want to point out the deep strengths of the Kalam, because the denial of a factor in the supporting factors can lead to hyper-skepticism, and I'll call it hypocrisy. And I'll call it hypocrisy because sometimes people, they just want to win the argument irregardless of the cost, irregardless of how silly they sound. And so what I found in discussing with these people is to avoid the support of these supporting factors. They will make a claim, but their very actions will show that they don't believe that claim. So in essence, they're being hypocrites with their life. They say one thing and they do another. Well, if you remember when we talked about how to build a worldview, that's not a good way of doing it. Your actions should be consistent with what you say and what you believe. But denial of any of these factors will either lead you to hyperskepticism and a form of hypocrisy. So all of these make it a very strong argument. It has withstood what I would call a philosophical onslaught for the last 30 years. Again, I would say I've read almost all the papers over the last 20 years. I have not been convinced, and I can be a critical person too, I've not been convinced of any opposition that really carries any weight. So, what does this argument show? Well, the Bible tells us from the very first verse that God created the universe. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, Genesis 1:1. The Lord made the heavens, 1 Chronicles 16:26. We know that God is not himself a physical part of the universe. 2 Chronicles 2:6 states, "The heaven and heaven of heavens cannot contain him." We also know that the Lord, the everlasting God, is eternal and infinite. His mighty power rules forever, Psalm 66:7. The Bible teaches very clearly that God is the uncaused first cause who created the universe by willing it into existence. The Kalam cosmological argument is consistent with the biblical account of the beginning of the universe and of the first cause. So, the argument shows the first cause which created the universe is personal, has a will, is eternal, and that it exists outside of time, is all-powerful because it created everything. Now, you could say that's not a good definition of all-powerful, and I would ask you, why not? Can you imagine anything more powerful than something able to create everything? And lastly, the first cause is a spirit being because it exists outside of our universe in a non-spatial and an immaterial existence. So these are all properties of the Christian God, meaning they're consistent with the Christian God. They're compatible with monotheistic religions, but they are incompatible with atheism or agnosticism. They're incompatible with atheism because it shows there's such a thing as a God. And I would say they're incompatible with agnosticism because you have to ignore a strong argument without warrant. So I would call this a good start. So how does the argument work? Well, William Lane Craig says the point of the argument is to demonstrate the existence of a first cause which transcends and creates the entire realm of finite reality. Having reached that conclusion, one may then inquire into the nature of this first cause and assess its significance. So, just to summarize, this is the first step which points to a first cause. And as we saw, it's a very generic first cause, has some of the attributes of the Christian God, and then we need to move on, right? We may need to use other arguments about God's existence to understand more attributes. So this is a first step. Okay, so let's look at a video from the Reasonable Faith Organization, which is a good summary of the Kalam.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedman and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the redshift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, So it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence, but one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, 3 leading cosmologists, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, prove that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.